Station, this is Frank White. How do you hear me?
We have you loud and clear, sir. Great to be talking with you today.
It's great to be talking with you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to talk with me. This is a really unique moment for me. I've interviewed quite a few astronauts, but I've never interviewed an astronaut who was in the middle of the experience that we're talking about. I've never interviewed a weightless astronaut, so this will be a lot of fun for me. We do have a lot of questions, so we might as well get right to them. I have some questions for all of you and some for each one of you, but just please feel free to chime in as we go. So I'm sure you heard from senior astronauts before you flew what it was going to be like to look out and see the Earth from a distance. I just wonder, how has the experience been similar to or different from what you were expecting? This is for all of you.
Yeah, I'll start off and then I'll pass it off to Nick and Christina here. You know, you're right. We had heard prior about it, and one of the things that I had heard was that it would be really hard to describe, and just wait. You're just going to have to see what I'm talking about. You're just going to have to go to the window and see what I'm talking about. You know, the awe of looking back at Earth and being up in space finally. And I think what's so accurate about it is that it's so hard to put words to. You know, if I were to talk to folks that were going to be coming up, I would probably say the same thing, which is, you know, just wait. It's really hard to describe. And I think along with that comes kind of this responsibility of how do you describe this to folks back home. You know, I really wish I could grab everybody on Earth and just give everybody a few minutes to look back at our beautiful planet.
And I echo what Anne said. I think that most astronauts recognize that it's going to be an individual experience. So while we were told in advance how much we would love it and how beautiful it is and what a great inspiration it is and what a great way it is to cope with long-duration space flight, being up here for a long time, I think for the most part people know that we're going to experience it in our own way, and so there's almost a protection of not planting too much to anticipate about it. So other than people telling me it's all worth it and it's going to be amazing, I didn't have too many preconceived notions about it, but I would say that any that I did have, it has exceeded them.
So Frank, I completely agree with what Anne and Christina have said. I guess the one thing that I would add is that for me it was a bit surprising, the depth of the experience. It's more than just seeing something. There's emotions. It impacts you psychologically. I think, you know, I find it fun to go down to the cupola and look out the window. And if you can spend a quiet 5 minutes there looking out the window, your mind races through all kinds of thoughts. And it's just such a provocative experience. It's something that I didn't expect.
Thank you for those answers, which are really great. And I guess it really is indescribable, but we're going to ask you to try a little more. And building on what you said, what is your understanding of your planet, your home planet, the Earth, now that you've seen it in this totally different way that's so rare and unique? So few people have seen it in this way.
Well, I think, you know, I grew up in Spokane, Washington, and, you know, I lived there my whole life until I was 18, and then I went to college and I went across the country. And I remember all of a sudden, instead of being defined by the school that I came from, you know, within my city, now I was living in New York and I was defined as that girl from Washington State. And then for graduate school, I was fortunate enough to go across the ocean and study in England. And so now, instead of being the girl from the high school or girl from that state, now I represented my country. And I think what's kind of neat about, you know, getting out and being in orbit is that it's kind of the way that we define ourselves, and it's very human. That's, you know, all the other kind of qualifiers go away, and I think the strength is not just looking back at the Earth, but looking around at the people that you're doing this with. And I can tell you, on launch day, I've never felt so profoundly human. I was sitting next to two people of two different nationalities, a Canadian and a Russian, and myself, and we required the same amount, or the same pressure, the same temperature, the same oxygen. Our bodies were reacting in the same way, and we were just, it's very, very human. And coming into space with we're up here with 5 other humans, that to me lends as much of a perspective looking back, because we all come from the same Earth, and no matter where we come from on Earth, we all require the same things to live. And I think the more we get to know one another, we also realize that we wake up and we want the same things in life. We're all driven by a passion for exploration, but at the end of the day, we also want happiness and peace and joy for ourselves and for our friends and family, and those are the things that we work toward. And so part of the effect for me is looking back and feeling a bond, a strong bond with all humans that walk on our planet.
Yeah, there's great diversity on the surface, but from orbit, it's all one, isn't it? Christina, you're a mountain climber. In terms of your previous experience, I'm curious, what was the biggest surprise for you when you got to the space station and looked back at the planet from a very different vantage point, but still from on high?
Yes, it's true. I have always loved rock climbing and mountain climbing and getting to summits because of the perspective it offers, and that is definitely amplified from here. I would say the most surprising thing I've experienced is how profound it is looking back at your home where you grew up. I remember distinctly the first time I saw coastal North Carolina, where I grew up, on Earth as I was looking out, and it literally took my breath away as it came into focus around the horizon, and I suddenly realized what I was looking at. Growing up, every time you travel or look at a map, you have little cues that you may use from the time you're little to find home, coastline features, rivers, mountains. And for me, I'm so used to making those out on a map to find my little hometown, that to see that happen on a planetary scale, and to see those same waterways and be able to make out the places where I grew up, was a very profound experience. And I hadn't really been expecting that, so it was a big surprise.
So you could see home, and eventually you'll be going back there, but you might not see it in the same way ever again, I suspect. Nick, I'm especially interested in long duration perceptions of the planet as opposed to the initial response. How has it changed over time for you to be there, and you go to the cupola and you maybe see the Earth from a window? Does it get to be ordinary and ho-hum?
Well, I think I can say that it is as far from ordinary and ho-hum today as it was the first day I got here. It is an amazing view, and it's constantly full of surprises and details that pop out to you. I was just talking to Christina this morning, and one of the things I've started to do is snap photos of just these little nuances on the surface of the Earth that just pop full of color, and it's a combination of colors that I would have never expected to see down on the surface of the Earth. So you're still finding new stuff, and that just takes my breath away. So it does not diminish as you go. I think it becomes more full. I talked before about how it's kind of a multi-dimensional experience, and it hits you on so many different levels. And I think the longer I've been up here, the more levels and the more I am able to contemplate what I'm seeing and digest it. And so I think it just becomes a more rich experience the longer you stay on orbit.
A bit deeper, perhaps, over time. Yeah. This is for all of you. I know that all of you have had EVAs or spacewalks now. How does the perception of the Earth change when you're out there and you don't have the spacecraft between you and the view?
I think one thing that really struck me was not how far we were from Earth, but how close we were to Earth. And it reminded me of scuba diving off of a ledge, where you can look at the ledge that you're next to and you might be deep into the ocean, but when you look behind you, you see the vast openness of the ocean, and you know that it goes so far beyond you and so much deeper than where you are. And that was kind of the effect when we were doing an EVA, and even the effect that we get, that I've gotten over time. You asked Nick about the duration of time, how my perspective's changed is, you know, at first it felt like we were going really far away from home, and now I feel like we are so close to the Earth. You know, we are barely in space. We're in space, but we're barely in space, and there's a long, long, long way that we haven't gone. And so I find myself looking back at Earth, yes, but I find myself spending a lot of time looking deeper into space and seeing what else is out there. And when we were on an EVA, it was like I could see Earth, and that was home, and we were pretty close to it.
I had a lot of the same experiences that Anne described, and one thing I would add that I experienced that was different from the indoor experience of looking out the window was actually seeing your buddy with the backdrop of Earth behind them. Here, our windows aren't necessarily that big, and so if you're looking out one, you rarely have the perspective of someone that you know so well, such a close friend, being in this same incredible environment as you. And one of the moments that I'll never forget on our EVA was when Nick was about 10 feet away from me and I saw the Earth going by behind him. And that was something that we don't really experience here inside. So it was wonderful, not only for myself to be out in that environment that we normally look out through the window, but to see, you know, people that we care so much about also out there. It just makes it that much more real.
The one thing I'd like to add is that when you asked the question, you said when you don't have the spacecraft between you and space, you're not looking through the spacecraft. And I think that for me is another aspect that makes a spacewalk a little bit different. We spend so much time training in the EMU, in the spacesuit, to get ready to do a spacewalk that it starts to feel second nature. It's like putting on your work clothes to be able to go outside. Slightly more complicated than that, but that's kind of how you feel once you put it on. And so it's a very immersive feeling. When you go out the hatch, you don't feel yourself as being out the hatch inside a spacesuit, your own little spacecraft working. You feel yourself actually exiting the spacecraft, just like you would, you know, leave the house in the morning to go to work. That's how you feel. And so you really feel like you're in space and there's nothing around you. And the view is so unobstructed that you can truly feel that way. Having such a wide angle field of view through the EMU helmet, there's just nothing between you and everything else that's below you and above you. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and it's even different on film, I would say, between an EVA shot and one from inside. And you talked about looking beyond, outward, compared to the scuba diving, looking into the ocean. You're really looking at the universe, aren't you? Did you have that feeling? My goodness, I'm looking at the entire universe now.
Absolutely, and I think you know, I'm intrigued by mountain climbing. I'm not as brave as Christina, so I don't climb things that are high off the ground. Hard to believe, but and I think about, like, you know, folks that climb Everest, and you get to the highest point on Earth, and you know you're at the highest point. There's no higher point out there. There's no way to climb higher physically. And this experience is very different. You know, we came out to space, but there's this profound realization that we are just at the base camp of exploration in outer space. And, you know, and even in the EVAs, or even right now in the space station, we are clinging to the gravitational pull of Earth as we are hurling through a giant universe. And, you know, like I said, it makes me feel very close to Earth. We are holding on to our home as we are going through the universe. But we are still in the grips of Earth where we are. And so I do find myself, though, the moonrises are one of the most incredible things to me, you know, because it's far, but it's attainably far, you know, and Mars is starting to become, that word attainable is starting to be used with Mars, like humans can attain the dream of going to Mars pretty soon. And I just think every time we go somewhere, it has been this way through the history of humans, and I think it's always going to be. We are always going to get somewhere and then look and say, what's just a little bit further?
And there will always be something a little bit further. So there will always be a need for astronauts, I suspect. Well, this is for all of you. This is for all of you as we're coming close to the end of our talk. If there was one thing that you wanted to really have everybody on Earth understand from your experience, because in a way you're representing all of us out there, what is it that you would like to tell them about what you've seen and what you've experienced and what we should know?
So when you look out on the horizon and you see where the curve of the Earth meets space, you can see clouds that extend up from the surface of the Earth, and then you also realize that the tops of those clouds, as high as they extend up, that's higher than the deepest oceans. And so you start to realize that we live on this small little sliver of the Earth, and the Earth is gigantic below us. And so it's only this little region that we all live. Everything that we know, all of humanity lives in that little sliver. And we live there together. And it's more obvious, now to me than ever that, we're part of the Earth. It's a living organism, and we're just one small part of that. And it really helps melt away a lot of differences.
I think one thing that I'll mention is to give you a feel for what we see from this particular altitude. If the Earth were just the size of a typical classroom globe, the amount that we see, our kind of field of view, would be maybe the size of a hockey puck projected onto that globe. So it's like you can think of us as like a little magnifying glass traveling across the Earth along our orbital path. And what we see through that magnifying glass is how different parts of the Earth are in terms of their geography, in terms of their environment. Physically, the colors we see are different. When we go over the Middle Eastern regions, we see the desert, we see the orange sand. When we go over South America, we see the jungles. And so that, coupled with not seeing borders, to me, I would want to tell everyone that no matter who you meet, no matter where they're from, not only does their culture define them and make them special, but also the geography of where they're from. Everywhere on the Earth looks different, and it helps to define who we are. So those differences that we might highlight, whether they be political or cultural, are actually just a product of where we happen to be from. But underlying it all, we're all human and we're all from the same planet. So I think that understanding of what makes us different and the appreciation of what has brought about those differences is something I would want to share.
And that really leads into exactly what I wanted to say, and Christina said it really well. What I would tell everybody on Earth is that every single person that you meet, even if you've traveled halfway around the world and you are in a different country and in a different culture, every single person that you come face to face with, you have more in common with than you do different. We have a need for peace and joy in our lives. We care about our family and our friends. And we have a drive to explore. We have an insatiable curiosity to know what's out there. And it takes form differently in everybody, but there are basic human traits that all of us share. And that is so much more of what we are is similar than is different. And we can be united through those things that make us the same, or we can be united through a fear of what's different. And I would ask everybody to focus on those aspects that make us human and similar. And space exploration is a great example of what can happen when people from all over the world unite by this common drive for exploration and a common humanity, and we solve problems and we ask those questions that are really fundamental to being human and saying what else is out there.
Well, those are very comforting words, I think, for us surface dwellers, and very, very helpful words for us, and I think really, really good advice. Just one last question. We're about at the end. Any advice to those who are hoping to have a similar experience via some of the commercial space flights that are coming up? Any advice on how to prepare?
So I think it's very difficult to prepare for what you're about to experience. You know, obviously you want to do your homework and understand a little bit about what's happened before you and some of the experiences that have tried to share. But I think it's a responsibility for those that do get the opportunity to make it into space and to gain this perspective, to try to share that perspective with those that don't have that ability. So regardless of how you get here, it's an obligation to go back and tell your story so that everybody else can learn from this as well.
I would just add that nothing extraordinary ever happened in your comfort zone. So get out of your comfort zone, and whatever is holding you back, you know, ignore it and push forward.
Words of wisdom, and hopefully everybody who hears them will do so. Thanks so much for taking time out of your busy day. We really appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye, Frank. Thank you. We enjoyed speaking with you.